Welcome back and thank you for joining us. I'm producer Jillian King, and it's my pleasure to share with you part 2 of the Spring 2026 edition of Boards Today, a Radio Entrepreneurs production. Introducing our panelists and your host for this discussion. We are joined today by Steve Snyder, partner and entrepreneur in residence at Gesmer Updegrove, and Martin Lowenthal, macroeconomic life and financial advisor with the Bulfinch Group. Scott Levy, senior advisor at DLA, could not be with us today. We wish him luck in his tennis championship semifinals today.
Yes. If he wins today, he goes to the finals.
So our thoughts are with him today.
Right.
Our special guest today is Mark Shirman, CEO of Approved Contact. And lastly, our hosts, Radio Entrepreneurs founder of Mage LLC, Jeffrey Davis, and CEO of OptiRTC, David Rubinstein. David, I will now leave the conversation with you.
Hey. Thank you, Jillian, and let's continue the conversation. Mark Shirman, it's great to have you here today, giving us some great perspectives on various governance and boards. And with that, I want to kick off our second section with Steve Snyder.
So part 1 was really terrific, Mark, especially getting your insights. I want to pose a question to you and to all of our panelists. Assume for a second that I'm a CEO at a smaller company that has taken no outside money. I've heard about the benefits of having an advisory board. Mark, why don't you start? I'd love to hear your advice and suggestions on what are the attributes of potential board members, advisory board members, that I should be looking for. What's their background, their experience? Who should I be looking for?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I have helped some local entrepreneurs just in that scenario put together their advisory board. First of all, what seems to work is getting folks from different backgrounds of expertise, an HR person, a finance person, a technology person, generally pretty senior, who's been through a few of these, maybe had a few failures or been part of a few failures, so they can point out some pitfalls along the way. Folks who have a big network. So that could be for business development. As I mentioned in the first segment, it's kind of where, and maybe that's because that's my area of focus is always top line. Folks who can bring deals into the table, bring partnerships to the table. But I have seen very positive results with folks that do this by bringing in an HR person, bringing in a compliance person, depending on the industry, of some seniority that can give them some advice and counsel without the formality of a real board of directors.
Other folks around the table, advice on whom I should be looking for?
Well, this is not to ingratiate myself with you, Steve, but I have found that when you can find a business attorney who understands entrepreneurship and business, that can save the business a lot of money and be very valuable advice as well. So I always like, you're looking to round out the team with the kind of expertise that a leadership team needs to run their business better. So sometimes if you can find the right attorney, and I'm not saying everybody is, it can be invaluable.
Not to jump into the middle, that is an absolutely great thought. I have had personal experience. I've seen that. It could be a real attorney. It could just be a person with a strong legal background. But especially when you're first starting out and it's contracts and it's employment contracts, it might be investors, it might be small investors, all that kind of stuff. If you have somebody at the table who understands that process is hugely invaluable.
But I'm going to add something, Mark, and I'm not trying to poke the bear again, but I think if you bring an attorney onto a board or a board of advisors, it shouldn't be from your law firm. I see that as a somewhat of a conflict. I'd like to see an outsider.
Yeah, good point. Great point.
We don't serve as formal members of a board of advisors, but we often attend advisory board meetings just to provide some insight. And just as a footnote of having an attorney on a board of advisors, I would strongly suggest that the right type of attorney is one who has a very strong business perspective. It
Completely.
isn't all about the law. There are way too many lawyers that think it's the legal dog that wags the business tail. It should be the business dog all the time, wagging all of the other tails. So it should be a business attorney with real business insight and experience. But Martin, you're next. What type of people should I be looking for?
So, my angle always comes from the finance part of it. And so what I've experienced over time is that as these businesses develop, they have to raise money. And a lot of these term sheets can get very, very complicated. There's a lot of vultures out there, and sort of dovetails with having the right kind of attorney there to make sure that the negotiations are fair, balanced, and that the entrepreneur or CEO understands exactly what he's getting involved in or agreeing to before he signs anything. I've seen some nasty situations unfold because they literally just didn't fully understand the implications of what of that term sheet.
That's really important too, in as much as if this goes forward, sometimes some of the tough negotiation leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Having somebody who could be your designated a-hole, if you will, who can manage some of that for you, keeps it all sort of rolling. So that level of negotiation is important.
Well, I'm going to add something to that, some checks and balances. Sometimes businesses start small. That's usually how they grow. And if you have internal financial people who are not sophisticated, they tend to hang on maybe too long. And sometimes their accountants are small firms and they're not as sophisticated. And you need somebody on the board, I think, who's very sophisticated financially, like Martin would say, because you need to know those checks and balances because the needs of the business change over time. And the change might not come from inside the company.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, to do that, listen, I met the founder of Waze many years ago, and he said something to me that really resonated. He said, he was talking about a staff matter, but the same thing applies at the board, that as hard as it can be, if there's a person who's not right there, you have to get rid of them for the success of the business, even if it's your best friend. And he said it just worked out that it was one of his very close friends that he had to get rid of. And he did it. And so the same applies. So like Jeff says, you might need to replace your audit firm or your accounting firm or the people that are in your finance department. And the person I'm talking about is that person who will coordinate all of that and help you think through it all and decide what the right thing is and make recommendations to the board and the CEO.
100%. And it should never be a surprise to that individual if you have to have a bad conversation with them.
Yep.
Okay. And that's sort of all part of the team building and things that go on. I was once interviewed for a very large job for a very big company. And some 20-year-old asked me, what are you most proud of in your business career, Mark? Which is something I never think of. We probably all think of the things we messed up on. And I said, firing 20 of my good friends and being friends with 18 of them still.
Wow.
Well, I don't understand. And I explained the whole kind of thing to him. And then he correctly surmised that I might be a little too entrepreneurial for this business.
There is an old expression that we hire too quickly and fire too slowly.
Right.
And that applies to an advisory board as well as to general employee population. So
100%.
It's critical to make sure that we have the best people, the right people, and that may change as the company moves into different stages.
Yeah. And my experience is it's usually the CEO who's an overly nice person who doesn't want to get rid. And we as advisors or board members or whatnot need to push along based upon kind of, you already know the decision, prolonging it isn't any good.
Yeah. And David, you had that experience? The Ruts or professional?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm going to play a little
old shark book on my coffee table, I'm sure. Fridays. But I want to add a couple of other personalities that I look for advisory. And it is that experienced CEO who's done the scale up and has had to deal with building a board of investors. But the other personality I look for is an experienced CTO, because I deal with tech startups, and oftentimes the tech entrepreneur who created the software and is overly passionate, thinks that's going to win at the end of the day, is making decisions based on their own personal needs and not on how do you build that scalable product. And so oftentimes that can be a blind spot. By having somebody on my board who who knows the technology, particularly in this age of AI, where we got a lot of hype going on. I found that that's been extremely helpful.
You know, David, I think you really hit that one out, because I remember you were, since I'm old now and I am somewhat histrionic, I remember sitting on a board of an engineering technology development firm, and we brought in on the board somebody more experienced than the CEO, more accomplished than the CEO. And the CEO used to come in and say, well, this is what we're going to develop, and this is how long it's going to take us, and this is how much money we're going to need. And this guy would just look at him and go, wrong. And he would correct him and say, this is how long it's going to take you. This is how much it's going to take you. And this is how you can do it right. And you know what? The business eventually got sold for a lot of money. And that reality really helped.
Absolutely. Got to stay grounded.
Mark, in the first session, you emphasized your focus on revenue driving and the importance of having people on the advisory board, that some number of people on the advisory board focusing on that. To me, that's most important, or one of the most important positions, because showing growth, scaling, traction goes a long way toward financing, which every company will need. But in so many ways, that's critical.
I agree. And again, I think I mentioned in this first section, often you have individuals on that advisory board who use up their network in the first 6 months, and then it's quiet, right? For any number of reasons, and in fairness to anybody. But it's important then to swap them out. Those, it's especially hard to sell these days. A lot of the stuff I do, both at a director level and advisories, are all around go-to-market. The market's evolved. Nobody takes emails. Nobody's at their desk anymore. You can't get phone calls through. So everything to push things forward is through partners or through warm introductions. And so that network really matters. And bringing in people, and there may be old folks like me, okay, who know a lot of folks, who can spread around some introductions and at least create a warm environment for a conversation, is hugely important.
You know, Mark, again, I'm going to jump on that one and agree with you, because, earlier in my career, it was always about dialing for dollars, when I was young, and the whole cold call environment does not exist anymore.
No.
And so you're right. Looking at how lead generation, opportunity generation happens is not even the way it was done 15 to 20 years ago. You have to come at it in a whole new way.
Correct. And, not to use the overused concept, but how to integrate in AI, which is a incredible tool, but a new paradigm. So somebody who has gone through this and done this, selling, marketing, content creation, not just how to write great lyrics or create a travel map for your vacation, which, by the way, both work great. But being able to do that in such a way to generate real deals and real opportunities.
Jillian King, I think we're coming up to the end of this segment.
Thank you, everyone, for that compelling discussion. That wraps up part 2 of this Spring 2026 Boards Today discussion. Thank you to all our listeners and viewers who have tuned in for this panel. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already heard it, and part 3 of the discussion to hear more on these topics. And if you're a fan of our videos, please be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and press that bell button. Radio Entrepreneurs is also active on LinkedIn, so follow our page there as well for more business advice and topical business discussions throughout the year. Until next time, thanks for listening. We'll be back with more stories on Radio Entrepreneurs.